The hotel receipt fell out of his jacket while she was ironing it for him. She was 8 months pregnant. She ironed his jacket. She found the receipt. She recognized the hotel, 22 minutes from their house, not Chicago, never Chicago. She stood in the closet they had built together, in the house she had furnished herself, carrying the child he had smiled about at dinner. And she felt the truth settle into her bones like February cold. Complete, without mercy. She did not scream. She did not cry. She folded the receipt. She put it in her pocket, and then she made 2 cups of tea and waited for him to come home. Because Clare Whitmore was not the woman her husband thought she was. She was never the woman he thought she was. He called her plain. He called her quiet. He called her the kind of woman a man marries before he figures out what he actually wants. He said all of this out loud to her face while she was carrying his son. What Derek Whitmore did not know, what he had never once bothered to find out in 8 years of marriage, was that his plain, quiet, unremarkable wife was the only daughter of Walter Hargrove, the man who owned more than half the city Derek had built his entire empire in. Stay with Clare, because what happens next is not about revenge. It is about a woman who finally stops protecting a man who never deserved her protection, and discovers in the wreckage of everything she thought she was building exactly who she has always been. Lesson statement. Sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do is simply stop making herself smaller for someone who was never worth the space she gave up. Meaning, plus value. This is a story about being underestimated, about staying too long in something that was quietly diminishing you, about the moment you stop apologizing for who you are and let the truth speak for itself. If you have ever been dismissed, if you have ever been told, in words or in silence, that you are not enough, if you have ever made yourself invisible to keep the peace in a life that was slowly becoming someone else's, this story is for you. Clare's journey is not just drama. It is a reminder that the people who underestimate you are almost always the ones who cannot afford to truly see you. If this story moves you, if Clare's strength reminds you of your own, let us know in the comments below. Tell us, have you ever been underestimated by someone who should have known better? Drop a comment. Share this with a woman who needs to hear it today. And if you believe that quiet strength is the most powerful kind, subscribe to this channel, because we tell these stories every week, and every single one of them is for you. Like, comment, share, subscribe, and stay for Clare. She is worth every minute.
The hotel receipt fell out of his jacket pocket at 6:47 in the evening. Clare Whitmore caught it before it hit the floor. She stood in the closet. Marble floors. Built-in shelving she had sketched herself on a napkin. The receipt was small, white, dated 3 Tuesdays ago. Derek had told her he was in Chicago. She stood very still. The baby kicked. Hard. Once. Like a warning she already knew she didn't need. The closet smelled like cedar and dry cleaning fluid. Clare stood between 2 rows of suits and held the receipt in both hands. She read it twice. A hotel name she didn't recognize. An address in this city. 22 minutes from their house. She turned the receipt over. Nothing on the back. She folded it carefully. She put it in the pocket of her cardigan. She finished hanging the jacket. She smoothed the shoulders the way she always did. Then she went downstairs. She filled the kettle. She set it on the burner. She found the herbal tea she'd switched to 8 months ago when the pregnancy made everything else taste wrong. She made 2 cups. She set Derek's at his usual place at the kitchen island. She sat at hers. The clock above the stove read 6:51. She sat and waited. Her hand went to her belly the way it always did when she needed to hold on to something real. The baby shifted under her palm. That slow, rolling movement she had come to love more than almost anything. She checked her phone. Lock, unlock, lock, unlock, lock. Nothing. Derek came home at 7:15. She heard his key in the door before she heard anything else. Then his briefcase on the floor, then his footsteps on the hardwood. He walked into the kitchen with his phone to his ear and one finger raised. The gesture that meant, "Give me a minute." And she sat and watched him finish the call. He set the phone on the counter. He looked at the tea. "You okay?" he said. "You look pale." "I'm fine," Claire said. He picked up the mug. He didn't sit. He stood at the island the way he did when he planned to leave again in a few minutes. "How was Chicago?" she asked. She kept her voice completely even. She moved her own mug in a slow circle on the countertop, a habit she'd had since college. She didn't think about it anymore. Derek answered without hesitating. The hotel name, the meeting, the client's first and last name, the restaurant where they'd had dinner, the weather, all of it smooth, all of it practiced. She watched his hands while he talked. They didn't shake. They never shook. Derek performed confidence so completely he had convinced himself it was the same thing as truth. She said, "That sounds productive." He said, "It was. Long but good." He picked up his briefcase. He said he was going upstairs to change. She said, "Okay." She waited until his footsteps reached the top of the stairs. Then she opened her laptop. She typed the hotel name into the search bar. The address came up immediately. She stared at it. She read the cross streets. She knew exactly where it was. She had driven past it 100 times. It was not in Chicago. It was not anywhere near Chicago. She sat with that for a moment. She closed the laptop. She went upstairs. She changed into her nightclothes. She set her phone on the nightstand. She lay in bed and listened to Derek move around in the bathroom, and she stared at the ceiling, and she thought about nothing specific, just a long, clear, terrible understanding settling into place. She did not sleep well. In the morning, she found the lipstick. She was getting his gray blazer to iron it. He'd asked her the night before. She'd said yes without thinking about it, because saying yes was what she did. She reached into the breast pocket the way she always checked pockets before ironing. Her fingers found it immediately. A lipstick. Small. The cap slightly worn at the edge, the way lipsticks get when they're used often. She brought it out into the light of the bathroom, dark red, a color she had never worn in her life. She stood at the bathroom counter and looked at it for a long time. The baby was very still. Outside the window, a car went past on the street. A bird was doing something in the tree near the fence. Everything was completely ordinary. She set the lipstick on the counter. She sat on the edge of the bathtub, both feet flat on the floor, one hand on her belly. She looked at the lipstick sitting on the white counter in the white bathroom of the house she had chosen and furnished and made into something she was proud of, and she breathed carefully, in and out. "Okay," she said quietly. The word sounded very small in the tiled room. She said it again, firmer. "Okay." She picked up the lipstick. She put it in her cardigan pocket alongside the hotel receipt. She did not throw it at the wall. She did not sit on the bathroom floor and cry. She went downstairs. She made breakfast. She ate alone because Derek had already left for the office and there was no note on the counter. There was never a note. She had stopped noticing the absence of notes sometime in the last year without realizing she had stopped noticing. She sat at the kitchen island and she ate, and she thought very carefully about the next thing she would do. That afternoon, she drove past the hotel. She didn't stop. She drove past slowly and looked at the entrance, the awning, the doorman, the potted plants on either side of the revolving door, and she felt the truth settle into her bones the way cold does in February. Completely, without mercy. She drove home. She stood in the nursery doorway. The room was everything she had planned. Sky blue ceiling, white crib she had assembled herself on a Saturday in January, following the instructions on her phone, one piece at a time. The mobile above it. Little wooden stars she had cut and sanded and painted herself because the ones in the store were either too expensive or not quite right. The stars turned slowly in the draft from the window. She put her hand on the doorframe. She looked at the room for a long time. He picked the wrong woman, she thought. She did not know yet how completely, devastatingly true that was. She went to the kitchen table. She opened her laptop. She searched for Nathan Reed. She found his firm's website. She read his bio. Senior partner, high asset divorce and estate litigation, client history, private. She called the office number. His assistant answered. Claire said, "I'd like to schedule a consultation with Mr. Reed. My name is Clare Whitmore. My maiden name is Hargrove." A brief pause on the other end, then, "Of course, Mrs. Whitmore. He has availability tomorrow morning." "That works," Claire said. She closed the laptop. She made dinner. She set the table. She waited. Derek came home at 7. They ate together and talked about nothing particular, and she watched him the way you watch something you have decided to understand completely before you let yourself feel the full weight of it. After dinner, she washed the dishes. She did not check her phone. She already knew everything she needed to know. Nathan Reed had an office on the 14th floor of a building downtown that smelled like good carpet and quiet money. He was a tall man in his middle 40s, with reading glasses and the specific unhurried manner of someone who has seen every version of a situation and is not alarmed by any of them. He asked Claire 3 questions. Did she have independent counsel when she signed the prenuptial agreement? No. Did she have adequate time to review it? She had 30 minutes. Was the agreement presented under any conditions that could be construed as pressure? She described it. The week before the wedding, guests already flying in, both attorneys on Derek's payroll. Nathan wrote something on his legal pad. He said, "That prenuptial agreement may not be valid." Claire sat across from him and listened carefully while he explained. She asked 2 follow-up questions. He answered both directly. She thanked him, confirmed the next appointment, and left. She sat in her car in the parking garage. For 4 minutes, she put both hands on the steering wheel. She looked at the concrete wall in front of her. He made a plan, she thought. He already had a plan. She started the car. She confronted Derek that Tuesday evening. She waited until after dinner. She cooked because it was her night, and she was not going to let her world's ending become an excuse to stop being who she was. She made pasta. She set the table. She ate. After the plates were cleared, she went to the living room. She set the hotel receipt and the lipstick on the coffee table. She sat in her chair, the one she had always preferred, the one slightly angled toward the window. She waited. Derek came in from the kitchen. He stopped when he saw the items on the table. She watched his face. He did not deny it. She could see that immediately. He sat on the sofa. He ran his hands through his hair. He exhaled like a man who had been holding something heavy for a long time and had finally set it down. "Her name is Savannah," he said. He said it like relief. Claire's hands were still on her knees. She let him talk. 14 months. He said that first, and she heard it land. 14 months. The entire pregnancy, and then more, further back than that. Back to before she knew she was carrying his child. He met Savannah at a conference in New York. She was 27. She was different. He used that word. Different. He said it the way people say it when they mean better without wanting to say better out loud. "I want a divorce," he said. "I'm 8 months pregnant," Claire said. "I know." He looked at her. "I didn't plan for the timing. Don't, she said. He stopped. The silence that followed lasted a long time. 8 years of marriage, and examined in the space between two people sitting in a room and finding nothing left to hold. She makes me feel alive, he said. The words dropped into the room like something carelessly broken. Claire looked at him. She thought about the night she drove herself to the emergency room at 4 in the morning. Second trimester, spotting. She had been frightened enough to cry in the car, but she had not called Derek because he had a flight at 6, and she had not wanted to be the kind of wife who made things difficult. She had held her own hand in the waiting room for 3 hours. She had been fine. She was always fine. She had made being fine into something he expected. "Did you ever love me?" she asked. Not with tears, not with blame, with the precision of a woman who needed one final piece of information. Derek looked uncomfortable. "Of course, at the beginning." "At the beginning," she repeated. "Claire, you can take the guest suite," she said. "I'll have Nathan draw up a proposal." He blinked. She could see it. The expectation of more tears, more asking him to explain himself, more of the Clare he had constructed in his mind, the one whose quietness he had read as docility, whose steadiness he had mistaken for acceptance of whatever he offered. "You're not going to say anything else?" he said. "Not tonight," she said. He left the room. She sat in her chair for a long time. The house was very quiet. Upstairs, she heard the guest suite door close. She put her hand on her belly. "I'm not crazy. I know what I saw." She picked up her phone. She pressed Brooke's name. It rang twice. "I need you," Claire said. Brooke said, "I'm already in the car." She came in 20 minutes. Same oversized sweatshirt she had worn to every crisis Claire had ever called her for over 15 years. She took one look at Claire, standing in the open doorway, and said, "Where is he?" "Guest suite." "Good." Brooke came inside. She went to the kitchen without being directed. She filled the kettle. She found the chamomile. She made 2 cups and set them on the coffee table and sat beside Claire on the sofa. She looked at the hotel receipt and the lipstick still sitting on the table. She didn't say anything about them. "Okay," she said. "Start wherever you want." Claire started at the beginning. Not the affair, the marriage. She talked for a long time, and what came out wasn't grief, not yet. It was inventory, an accounting of every moment that had made sense in one light and made complete different sense in another. The Chicago trips. The New York conference 14 months ago, when he'd come home lighter and she'd thought it was the time away and she'd made his favorite dinner. The way he'd stopped reaching for her hand, incrementally, like a tide going out so slowly you don't notice until you're standing on sand that used to be underwater. The nursery. She had done most of it alone. He'd been enthusiastic at the beginning. They'd argued happily over crib models in a store on a Saturday afternoon. But somewhere between the paint samples and the finished room, his attention had migrated elsewhere. She'd hung the last picture herself. She'd painted all the stars herself. He'd come to see the finished room and said it looked great, and immediately gone back to his phone. Brooke listened to all of it without interrupting. When Claire finished, Brooke said, "He was never in your league." "I have known this since year 2. "Then why didn't you—" "Because you loved him," Brooke said. "And because I was wrong about the timing." They sat quietly after that. The baby moved. Claire put her hand on her side. "He is going to be fine," she said. "Whatever else happens." "He's going to be more than fine," Brooke said. "He's a Hargrove." Claire went still. Brooke looked at her directly. "Have you called your father?" "No." "Claire, I know," she said, more firmly. "I'll handle it. My way." Brooke understood, then, that this was the most important sentence of the evening, not because of what it meant for the divorce, because of what it meant for Clare. She was not asking Walter Hargrove to fix it. She was choosing how she would fix it herself. That distinction was the first crack of light. She called her father at 5:40 in the morning. Walter Hargrove answered on the second ring. He had been awake since 4. He always had been. "Dad," she said. "I know," he said. She paused. "You know?" "Preston called me last night." A brief silence. "I've been waiting for you." There was something in her father's voice she couldn't name immediately. She would understand it later. It was the sound of a patient man who had been watching something develop for a long time and had been very careful not to act before he was asked. "I need to do this my way," she said. "Of course," he said. "I mean it, Dad." "I know you do." A pause. "How are you feeling, physically?" "Tired. Rest today. Everything else can wait 24 hours. Everything else is going to have to wait considerably longer than that," she said. "Yes," he agreed. "But it will wait, because I will make it wait." She didn't ask him what that meant. Not yet. She went to bed. She slept 4 hours. When she woke up, Derek's car was gone. No note on the counter. She stood at the kitchen window and looked at the empty driveway. He never looked back, she thought. Not once. I just never noticed. She turned away from the window and made breakfast. Brooke arrived that afternoon. She came with an overnight bag and the specific energy of a woman who has cleared her schedule without being asked. She made tea. She did not ask questions. She occupied the kitchen with a comfortable efficiency while Clare sat at the table and did something she had not done in weeks. Nothing. Just sat. Just breathed. By evening, the silence of the house had changed texture. It was still heavy, but it was her silence now, not a silence she was performing for someone else's comfort. Derek called twice that day. She did not answer. That night, unable to sleep, she went to the nursery. She sat in the glider she had bought at a consignment shop 8 months ago. She had repainted it herself. Soft white, 2 coats, a Sunday afternoon, in early March with the windows open and music on her phone. The cushion she had sewn herself from fabric she found at a craft store in a neighborhood Derek had once described, without embarrassment, as not really your area. She sat in the glider in the dark, and she remembered that Sunday afternoon, 5 months pregnant, paint smell, and new leaves coming through the open window. A whole afternoon alone with something she was making into something beautiful. She had been, that afternoon, completely happy. She ran her thumb along the armrest. She could feel the slight ridges of the brushstrokes under her skin. That afternoon was real, she thought. Whatever he was doing that day, that afternoon was real for me. She stayed in the glider until 3 in the morning. Then she went back to bed, and she lay in the dark, and she let herself do something she had been keeping carefully at bay. She remembered. All of it. Not the betrayal. The life. 8 years of mornings and dinners and ordinary Saturdays. The early years when it had been good, genuinely good, and she had believed in it with everything she had. She let herself remember the good parts too, because she had earned the right to grieve them honestly. She thought about the trip to Vermont in their second year. They had rented a cabin and argued about directions and laughed so hard at dinner one night that she had cried. She had thought, this is what I want. This is what everything is for. She thought about the house. She had found it herself, walked through it alone on a Tuesday afternoon with a realtor, and stood in the backyard and felt something she could only describe as recognition. She had called Derek immediately, standing in the middle of the dead grass, and said, I found it. He had said, I trust you. And she had believed him. She thought about the first pregnancy scare. Not this baby. Before. 2 years into the marriage. A false alarm that had turned out to be nothing. But in the 2 days between the test and the confirmation, she had felt something open up in her chest. Hope. Readiness. She had looked at Derek's face when she told him and seen something real there. Genuine. Unperformed. He was different then, she thought. Or I saw him differently. She was not sure anymore. Which of those was true? She thought about the nursery, the mobile, the stars she had painted on a kitchen drop cloth, one at a time, each one slightly different because she had been doing it freehand and she had decided imperfection was more honest than precision. She had been alone for most of the nursery project. She had told herself Derek was busy. She had told herself that was fine. She had told herself a great many things to protect the version of her life she needed to believe in. I was being gaslit the whole time, she thought, and the clarity of it was both terrible and freeing. The baby moved, a long, slow shift. Elbow or knee, she could never be certain. She put both hands on her belly in the dark room. I know, she whispered. I know. She stayed there until dawn. When morning came, she called Nathan Reed's office. She confirmed their next appointment. She asked 2 specific questions about asset discovery timelines. She wrote down his answers in the small notebook she kept in her cardigan pocket. Then she called her mother. Margaret Hargrove answered immediately. Her mother always answered immediately. Come for lunch, her mother said, not a question. Yes, Claire said. Her parents' house was on the north side of the city. Not the address Derek had been to twice in 8 years. The real house, behind a gate marked with only the street number. A property in the Hargrove family for 4 generations. Her great-grandfather had broken ground on a Tuesday morning in early spring, and by the time he died, the city had grown around him in every direction. Her mother was on the front porch when she arrived. Margaret Hargrove was 61 years old and had the specific quality of a woman who has never needed to announce herself in any room. She hugged Claire carefully. She smelled like the soap she had always used, the same one since Claire was small. Clean and simple and completely reliable. Come inside, she said. I made soup. They sat in the kitchen for 2 hours. The kitchen Claire had grown up in. White walls and old copper pots, and a window above the sink that looked out onto the back garden, where her father grew tomatoes every year, even though he had no particular need to grow his own tomatoes. Her mother didn't say much. She moved around the kitchen quietly, setting things on the table, occasionally putting her hand on Claire's shoulder as she passed. When Claire finished talking, Margaret sat across from her and folded her hands on the table and said, in the voice she reserved for things she believed absolutely, you are going to come through this. I know, Claire said. Her mother looked at her for a long moment. You've known who you were for a very long time, Margaret said quietly. The difficulty is that you were trying to be that person inside a marriage to someone who didn't see it. Claire looked at the window. I let him not see it, she said. Yes, her mother agreed. She didn't say it harshly. She said it the way honest people say true things. Without comfort, but without cruelty either. I'm not doing that again, Claire said. No, said Margaret Hargrove. You're not. Nathan Reed arrived at the house at 10 the following morning with a legal pad, a financial analyst's preliminary report, and the measured expression of a man who has prepared for this meeting more carefully than the client yet understands. He sat at Claire's kitchen table and opened without preamble. The prenuptial agreement will not survive a challenge, he said. I'm confident of that. The question is whether we challenge it formally or use the threat of challenge as negotiating leverage. What do you recommend? Claire said. That depends on what he does next. Nathan opened the report. I want to talk about asset movements. What Nathan had discovered in the 48 hours since Claire's first call was methodical and deliberate. Derek had been moving assets for approximately 7 months. Shell companies, transfer of equity in 2 commercial properties, and Nathan paused here and set down his pen. A private trust, established in the name of Savannah Cole, funded with $430,000, traced to a joint marital account. Claire sat very still while Nathan explained each item. 7 months ago, she said, approximately. She did the math. She did it quickly because she had always been quick with numbers. Another thing Derek had not noticed about her. Right around the time I told him I was pregnant, she said. Nathan did not answer. His pause answered for him. Claire stood up. She walked to the kitchen window. She looked at the backyard, the garden she had planted in their 3rd year, the stone path she had laid with her neighbor on a weekend when Derek was golfing, the roses along the fence that had taken 2 full seasons to establish, and which this past spring had finally done what she'd always imagined. She looked at the garden, and she thought about the specific afternoon 7 months ago when she had told Derek she was pregnant. She had made dinner. She had set the table with the good dishes, not because it was a special occasion, but because she had wanted it to feel like one. She had told him over the salad course. He had put down his fork. He had said, "Are you sure?" And then, "That's wonderful." And she had believed the second thing without examining how quickly it had followed the first. While I was painting stars on a mobile, she thought, he was moving our money into a trust for his girlfriend. The anger was not a wave, it was a door, opening into a room that had been locked for a long time. She turned around. "What do we do?" she said. Nathan picked up his pen. "We file an emergency injunction to freeze all asset transfers within 48 hours. We formally challenge the prenuptial. We document every financial movement since the pregnancy announcement." He set the pen down. "And then I would like to bring in your father's legal team in a supporting capacity, if you consent." "Does Derek know about my father?" Claire said. "Based on everything you've described, I would say no." "He doesn't," she confirmed. "Derek doesn't ask about my family. He finds them quiet." She picked up her tea. "He's never asked what my father does specifically. He knows he's in real estate. He assumed it was modest because my father doesn't talk about it." Nathan very carefully did not change his expression. "Derek is very good at assuming things about people who don't announce themselves loudly," Claire continued. She looked at Nathan steadily. "That is going to be extremely uncomfortable for him." "Yes," Nathan said. "It is." That afternoon, she drove to her parents' house. Her father was waiting on the front porch. He stood when he saw her car come through the gate. 64 years old, gray-haired, unhurried, old khakis and a flannel shirt and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. He did not look like a man who owned, through a carefully constructed network of holding companies and long-term trusts, the majority of the commercial real estate built in this city in the last 40 years. He looked like a retired teacher who grew his own tomatoes. He hugged her carefully, mindful of her belly. "Come inside," he said. "Your mother made soup." Preston arrived at noon. He was 35, quieter than most people, expected from a man his size, with the specific stillness of someone who learned from his father that the loudest presence in the room is rarely the most powerful one. He sat across from Claire and watched her talk with the face of a protective, older sibling holding himself in very careful check. Claire looked at all 3 of them. "I'm not asking you to do anything," she said. "This is my situation. I'm handling it." "Of course," her father said. "But I need to know one thing." She looked at Walter directly. "When Derek realizes who you are, I need you to let things unfold naturally. Don't step in front of what's already in motion." Her father considered this. "Define naturally." He's going to lose things, she said. Business relationships, properties, deals that depend on your goodwill without him knowing it. I don't need you to accelerate that. I just need you to stop cushioning it. Walter Hargrove looked at his daughter for a long, measuring moment. My darling, he said quietly, I stopped cushioning it the day he filed divorce papers without informing you first. Claire looked at her father. Thank you, she said. She meant it for more than this. She had always meant it for more than this. Preston leaned forward. The house is in my name, Claire said. Derek insisted 2 years ago. Tax purposes. I have all the documentation. Preston almost smiled. He did you a favor, he said. He did himself a favor, she said. He just didn't understand what it implied. She drove home in the late afternoon. The light was low and golden on the streets she'd lived on for 8 years. She thought about Derek in his new apartment, Savannah's apartment, though he was calling it a furnished rental when he mentioned it to mutual friends, which she knew because Brooke knew everything. She thought about Savannah celebrating. She thought about how completely both of them had misread the situation. I deserved better than this, she thought, not in anger, in simple, clear recognition. She pulled into the driveway. She sat in the car for a moment. She thought about the room upstairs with the sky-blue ceiling and the hand-painted stars, and the child inside her who would sleep in that room, and the life that was going to be built in this house that was hers, entirely hers. And she thought, he picked the wrong woman. She got out of the car. She went inside. She made dinner for herself. Savannah Cole had been waiting 14 months for this exact evening. She stood in her kitchen doorway with a glass of champagne she had opened before Derek arrived, because she had known. She had always known she would win this. She had been more patient than anyone who knew her would have believed possible. And now Derek was on her sofa, with a bag at his feet, telling her the divorce papers had been filed, and everything she had planned for was finally beginning. She was 27 years old. She had done her research on Clare Whitmore. She had found the social media profiles, sparse and infrequent, and the nonprofit work, and the quiet marriage, and the garden photographs. She had studied the woman and confirmed what she already believed, plain, earnest. The kind of woman a man marries when he hasn't yet identified what he actually wants. Derek, she believed, had finally identified it. She sat beside him and listened while he talked. He was more unsettled than she'd expected. She had anticipated relief. The loosening she always saw in him when they were together. Instead, he was tense, rubbing his jaw, not quite meeting her eyes. She didn't react the way I expected, he said. What do you mean? She was calm. He frowned at the middle distance. Completely calm. She already had an attorney. Savannah filed this information carefully. Calm was either shock or strategy. She decided it was shock. Claire was not the strategic type. Claire was the type who painted furniture and grew tomatoes and made soup from scratch because she had that kind of time. She'll fall apart once it's real, Savannah said. Women like that always do. Derek nodded slowly. He did not look convinced. What attorney? Savannah asked. Nathan Reed. She didn't recognize the name. She made a mental note to look him up. She was thorough about research. It was one of her best qualities. The evening progressed. Derek relaxed incrementally. By 10 o'clock, he was closer to himself, confident, expansive, talking about what came next. The apartment he would find, the trips they would take. She refilled his glass and said all the right things and watched him reconstruct his self-assurance piece by piece the way she had watched him do it many times before. She was very good at this. Later, alone in the bathroom, she Googled Nathan Reed. She sat on the edge of the bathtub and read his firm's profile, and she felt the first small, cold drop of something she would not yet call doubt. Senior partner, high asset divorce, and estate litigation. 22 years of practice. Not a neighborhood family attorney, not a general practitioner, the kind of attorney you called when you had significant assets to protect and the ability to pay for someone who knew exactly how to protect them. She went to a serious attorney immediately, Savannah thought. She put her phone in her pocket. She went back to the living room. She smiled at Derek and said nothing about Nathan Reed. She decided to wait and see. Across the city at that moment, Claire was sitting in Dr. Susan Hartley's office for her scheduled appointment. Dr. Hartley measured and listened and checked and declared everything progressing well. Then she set down her clipboard and looked at Claire with the direct, unhurried attention of a physician who has been paying close attention. "How are you sleeping?" she asked. "Not well," Claire said. "Stress levels? Higher than they should be." Dr. Hartley sat back. "Something going on at home?" Claire looked at her hands for a moment. She looked up. "My husband just told me he wants a divorce," she said. Dr. Hartley was quiet. Then she said, with considerable precision, "I'm sorry. That is an unconscionable thing to do to a woman who is 8 months pregnant." Claire almost smiled. "Yes, it is. I want to see you twice a week until you deliver," Dr. Hartley said. "And I want you to have my cell number, not the office line." Claire looked at her. "You shouldn't be driving yourself to appointments alone," Dr. Hartley said. "Is there someone?" "My friend Brooke," Claire said. "My mother." "Good. Use them." Driving home, Claire thought about what the doctor had understood immediately. Something her husband of 8 years had failed to register. What was happening to her was not just emotionally unconscionable. It was physically dangerous. Stress at 32 weeks. A pregnant woman alone in a house with a man who had already decided she was disposable. She called Brooke. "Can you stay with me this week?" she said. "I've been packed since Tuesday," Brooke said. Brooke moved in on Thursday. Derek had relocated to Savannah's apartment, telling people it was a temporary furnished rental, and the house settled into a new shape. Quieter and heavier and entirely Claire's. Brooke made meals. She filled silences with cheerful, inconsequential observation. She made Claire laugh twice on Thursday, 3 times on Friday. She counted these privately, like small victories. Nathan called on Friday afternoon to confirm the injunction had been filed. Claire wrote the information in her notebook. She stood at the nursery window and looked out at the street below. A woman walked past with a stroller. An older man with a dog. An ordinary Friday afternoon in an ordinary neighborhood. She thought about Derek sitting in Savannah's apartment, believing he had made the right choice. She thought about the $430,000 in a trust with Savannah's name on it. She thought about the easy authority with which he had said, "She makes me feel alive." The absolute confidence of a man who has never once considered that the person he is leaving might be holding things he cannot see. The hardest part is admitting I knew all along. She had known. In some part of herself, she had kept carefully quiet. She had known for longer than she wanted to admit. She had known, and she had kept painting stars on a mobile in a nursery for a baby whose father was building an exit strategy. She turned from the window. She was done being quiet about the things she knew. The emergency injunction went through on Monday. Nathan's office called at 9 in the morning. His assistant's voice was professionally neutral. The injunction covered 6 accounts, 2 commercial properties, and the private trust in Savannah Cole's name. All asset transfers were frozen pending the financial investigation and divorce proceedings. Claire was sitting at the kitchen table when the call came. She had her notebook open and her tea in front of her. She wrote down the key points in her careful handwriting and said thank you and ended the call. She sat quietly for a moment. Then she picked up the phone and called her father. Nathan's injunction was approved, she said. Good, Walter said. Dad? She paused. Thank you for waiting. A brief silence. It was the right thing, he said. It was yours to do. She understood then what she had always known about her father, but had not had language for until this moment. He had spent 40 years building something significant, and he had done it by understanding the difference between power and force. Force announced itself. Power waited. Power understood that the most effective intervention was often no intervention at all. Just the patient removal of cushioning and the willingness to let natural consequences land where they were always going to land. She had learned this from him without knowing she was learning it. She was his daughter completely. Derek called twice on Monday. She did not answer. She watched the phone ring from the nursery glider, and she felt not triumph exactly, but something quieter and more certain. The sensation of events moving at exactly the right speed. She texted him one line. All communication goes through Nathan. Please respect that. She put the phone down. She spent the rest of the day doing something small and important. She worked. She opened the laptop and found the grant proposal she had started 14 months ago and set aside when the pregnancy had slowed her down. An arts education initiative, 3 pages of notes, and a half-finished outline, and a conclusion she hadn't been able to find the right words for at the time. She read through what she had written. It was good. It was genuinely good. She worked on it for 2 hours, quietly at the kitchen table, with the afternoon light coming through the window, and Brooke reading something in the living room, and the baby shifting occasionally as if checking in. At 4 o'clock, she saved the document and closed the laptop. She had not thought about Derek for 2 hours. That was new. That evening, Diane Whitmore called. Derek's mother. She was 65, a social climber of the specific variety that mistakes connections for character and had spent the early years of Clare and Derek's marriage deploying phrases like, Clare has such lovely, quiet manners, in a tone that meant something more complicated. She had adored the idea of Clare, the Hargrove name, the family stability, the grace, while simultaneously having no actual interest in Clare as a person. Now she called to express concern. I just want you to know, Diane said, that I told Derek this was not how a man behaves. I told him that. Clare said, I appreciate that, Diane. And the baby and I are both fine, Clare said. Thank you for calling. She ended the call. She put the phone on the counter. She stood in the kitchen and breathed for a moment. She did not need Diane Whitmore's concern. She did not need Derek's mother performing loyalty now that it cost nothing. She had her mother. She had Brooke. She had Dr. Hartley's cell phone number. She had everything she actually needed. On Tuesday, Nathan's financial investigator delivered the complete asset movement report. Clare read it at the kitchen table in the morning, beginning to end, twice. It was 41 pages. It documented 7 months of carefully executed financial maneuvering, building from small transfers to significant ones designed to be difficult to detect and more difficult to reverse. Designed by a man who believed his wife would not notice, would not fight, would accept whatever portion of their joint life he offered on his way out the door. He thought I wouldn't know, she had said to Nathan. He clearly believed that, Nathan had replied. She set the report on the table. She thought about Derek constructing this plan, the spreadsheets, the shell company names, the calls with Gary, the patient incremental work of dismantling a life he had decided he was finished with. She thought about all of this happening in parallel with her painting the nursery ceiling, assembling the crib, sewing the glider cushion, growing the roses, building the home he was simultaneously planning to leave. She thought, I will not be angry about this forever. She thought, but I am going to be angry about it for exactly as long as it takes. She closed the report. She called Nathan. I've read it, she said. Let's proceed, Nathan said. I'll have the settlement proposal ready by Thursday. She said, make it fair. Not generous, fair. A brief pause. That's a distinction not every client makes, he said. I'm aware, she said. She hung up. She stood at the kitchen window and looked at her garden, the roses along the fence, the stone path, everything she had built. Starting over feels impossible, she thought, but staying felt worse. She had stayed too long already, not because she was weak, because she had been protecting the life she'd imagined from the truth of the life she was actually living. She understood that now. She went back to the kitchen table. She opened her laptop. She worked on the grant proposal for another 2 hours. She woke at 2 in the morning on Saturday with pain that was not ordinary. She had been waking with discomfort for weeks, third trimester aches, hip pain, the specific exhaustion of a body doing complex work. She knew those pains. She cataloged them automatically now, the way you learn to read familiar weather. This was different. She lay in the dark and timed it for 4 minutes. In and out. In and out. She got up carefully. She went to the doorway of Brooke's room. Brooke, she said. Brooke was awake. In 3 seconds, she sat up. She looked at Clare. She did not ask if Clare was sure. She said, I'll get my shoes. They were at the hospital in 22 minutes. The next 6 hours were the longest of Clare's life. She was in triage when Dr. Hartley arrived. She had not expected that. Had not expected her doctor to come in at 3 in the morning on a weekend. The sight of her walking down the fluorescent lit hallway, unhurried and completely certain, made Clare's eyes fill for the first time since the confrontation with Derek. It was not the hospital that broke her composure. It was someone showing it up. Dr. Hartley checked everything methodically. She spoke to the nursing staff in a calm, direct shorthand. She explained to Clare, prodromal labor, not true labor, not yet. The baby was fine. Clare was fine. But the stress indicators were elevated, and the contractions were real, even if they were not progressive, and she wanted Clare observed overnight and on complete rest for the following week. Your body is telling you something, Dr. Hartley said, sitting beside the bed. It's been telling you something for a while. I'd like you to start listening. Clare looked at the ceiling. I'm listening, she said quietly. Brooke slept in the chair beside the bed, wrapped in a hospital blanket, having refused every suggestion that she go home. She fell asleep with her arms folded and her head tilted at an angle that would obviously hurt in the morning, and she stayed that way, and Clare watched her for a moment before turning off the light. At 3 in the morning, Brooke was asleep and the room was dark, and the machines measured Clare's aliveness in small, steady numbers, and she was alone with herself in the specific way that hospital rooms at 3 in the morning make you alone, stripped of distraction, unable to do anything but think. She thought about everything. She thought about the version of herself at 24, signing a prenuptial agreement in 30 minutes because she was embarrassed to ask for more time. The attorneys on Derek's side, both of them, and her, not wanting to make things difficult the week before the wedding, with guests already flying in from 3 states. She thought about the morning she drove herself to the emergency room at 4 in the morning in her second trimester, holding her own hand in the waiting room, 3 hours alone on a plastic chair under fluorescent lights that looked not unlike these, thinking I'm fine, I'm always fine until she believed it. She thought about every evening in the past year when Derek came home late and she said nothing. Not because she had nothing to say, because she had trained herself to say nothing, because she had become, so gradually she hadn't felt it happening, a woman who made herself smaller to fit into the space a man had decided she occupied. Somewhere along the way, I became invisible. She said it aloud, quietly, to the ceiling. The machines continued their small, steady work. She thought about her father, who had never once in her life made her feel invisible, who had called her back at 5:40 in the morning and said, "I've been waiting for you," because of course he had, who had built half a city in deliberate, unglamorous silence, while men like Derek built their empires on noise and assumption, who had handed her, without ever explaining it directly, a complete understanding of the difference between announcing yourself and being. She had been trying to be that person, her father's daughter, the woman she actually was, inside a marriage that had no architecture for her, no room for who she really was. She had kept folding herself smaller, quieter, less inconvenient, until the person she was had become almost entirely invisible, even to herself. He never loved me. He loved the idea of me, the idea of a quiet, steady, uncomplicated woman who didn't need much and never asked for more than she was given. The reality of her, her father's daughter, the woman who had read the grant proposal tonight and thought this is genuinely good, the woman who had called Nathan Reed within 48 hours and asked exactly the right questions, the woman who had told Walter Hargrove, "I need to do this my way," and meant it completely. That woman, Derek, had never been curious enough to find. The hardest part is admitting I knew all along. She had known, not the specific facts, not the hotel receipts and the lipstick and the 14 months, but the larger truth, that she had been invisible to him for a long time, and she had permitted it because she was afraid that asking to be seen would cost her the life she'd built. She picked up her phone. She opened the notes application. She began to type. Not a letter to Derek, not a list of what he had taken. She typed a promise to herself, specific, concrete, what she wanted to do, what she wanted to stop doing, what she would not accept from anyone ever again. She wrote for 40 minutes. She saved the note. She put the phone down. The baby nudged her, right below her ribs. One careful, deliberate movement. "I know," she said softly. "I know." She slept. Her mother arrived at 7 in the morning with a thermal bag. Soup, fruit, a container of lemon shortbread. She sat in the chair beside the bed and took Claire's hand and said nothing for a long time. Then she said, in the voice she reserved for things she believed absolutely, "You are going to come through this." "I know," Claire said. "Your father is being patient," her mother added, with the particular precision of a woman being careful with her words. "I am slightly less patient." Claire looked at her. "Derek's current business portfolio," Margaret said, smoothing the blanket across Claire's legs, "contains several properties whose lease structures depend on your father's goodwill. 2 of his pending development deals require city permits, reviewed by a committee your father has quietly advised for 11 years. She folded her hands. "I'm simply noting." Claire was quiet for a moment. "I need him to understand what he lost," she said. "Not what was taken from him, what he lost. Those are different things." Margaret Hargrove looked at her daughter. "Yes," she said. "They are very different things," Claire said. She looked at the window. Early spring light, thin and honest. "I'm going to be all right," she said. Margaret squeezed her hand. I know, she said. I have always known. She came home on Sunday afternoon. Brooke enforced the bed rest with a cheerful ruthlessness that left no room for negotiation. Clare was confined to the couch or the nursery glider, fed regular meals, and permitted to work on the laptop for 2-hour stretches before Brooke removed it, without apology. It should have felt frustrating. It felt, instead, like being held. On Monday afternoon, Derek called 4 times in 2 hours. She watched the phone ring from the nursery glider. She did not answer. She sent the single text she had already decided on. All communication goes through Nathan. She put the phone face down. She picked up the book she was reading, a book about infant sleep that Brooke had produced from somewhere. And she read 3 chapters and felt the specific luxury of a mind not organizing itself around someone else's needs. On Wednesday, Preston came. He sat across from her in the living room, and they talked for a long time. About the house, which was hers, about the settlement terms Nathan was preparing, about the grant proposal she told him she had been working on. Preston looked at her. You're doing this right, he said. I'm trying, she said. No. He shook his head. You're doing it right. There's a difference. She understood what he meant. She was not managing the situation. She was not surviving it. She was moving through it with intention, at her own pace, making choices that were entirely hers. That was different from trying. That was actually doing it. Across the city, Derek was having a different week. His attorney called on Monday afternoon. The injunction had gone through. Derek's response was to call Gary, his financial manager, who explained with visible discomfort that he was being asked to provide 7 months of documentation to Nathan Reed's investigative team. Gary, in the course of this conversation, mentioned something he had noticed in his preliminary research on Nathan Reed's firm. The firm's client roster was private, but there was a holding company on a matter from several years ago whose name Gary recognized from the commercial real estate filings he dealt with regularly. Hargrove Enterprises. Derek said, There are a lot of Hargroves. Gary said, carefully, This particular Hargrove Enterprises appears to own most of the commercial property along the North Waterfront Corridor and a significant portion of the Midtown Development Zone. Derek said, How much is significant? Gary hesitated. Based on my estimates, working from public filings and cross-referenced lease records, it appears that Hargrove Enterprises owns or controls the majority of the commercial real estate inventory in this metropolitan area, more than half of everything built in the last 40 years. The silence that followed was very long. Look up Walter Hargrove, Derek said. Gary looked up. Walter Hargrove. The silence after that was longer. Derek sat in Savannah's apartment, the apartment he was calling a furnished rental, and looked at the information on his screen and understood, in a way that arrived all at once and could not be taken back, what he had done. He thought about the dinners at Clare's parents' house, twice in 8 years. Walter in a flannel shirt, Margaret offering more soup. A house he had privately considered modest for a family that called itself established. Walter asking thoughtful questions about Derek's business ventures, and Derek answering with the expansive confidence of a man who assumed he was being impressive. He thought about the time he had mentioned his property on the North Waterfront, the one he'd been proud of. He'd said something like, nice area, real growth potential, and Walter had said, I believe I know that block, and Derek had smiled generously. Walter owned that block. Walter owned the entire block and everything around it, and had said, I believe I know that block, in the mild, pleasant tone of a man who finds no need to explain what he knows. Derek called Clare. She did not answer. He called again and again. On the 4th call, he left a message. His voice in the message had a quality she would hear later and recognize immediately. The controlled, tightening panic of a man who has just understood that the door he thought he could close at any time was not a door at all, but a load-bearing wall. Nathan Reed's assistant called Derek's attorney that afternoon to schedule a settlement conference. The proposed terms were attached. Derek's attorney read them twice. He called Derek. "These terms are not aggressive," he said. "They're measured, equitable." A pause. "Clare Whitmore is not trying to destroy you. She is ensuring she and her child receive what is fair." "And if I don't accept," Derek said, "then we go to contested proceedings with Nathan Reed, with a prenuptial that won't survive challenge, with the asset transfer documentation they already have, with the full resources of the Hargrove family behind her." Another pause. "She could take everything, Derek. She is choosing not to." Derek was quiet. He thought about Clare sitting across the coffee table, hands still on her knees, asking if he had ever loved her, not with tears, but with the precision of a woman who just needed one more piece of information. He had read her composure as numbness, as someone absorbing a blow. It was neither. It was a woman who already knew exactly what she was doing. Cole Whitmore arrived on a Tuesday, 7 pounds 4 ounces, born in the early morning, in the room where Dr. Hartley worked with calm efficiency, and Margaret stood at Clare's side and Brooke paced the waiting room in a pattern she would later describe as almost meditative, mostly frantic. Dr. Hartley placed him on Clare's chest. He was wrinkled and opinionated and completely, urgently present from the first moment. Clare looked at his face and felt everything else recede to its correct distance. The injunction, the settlement, the pending signatures, the story that would be told about her marriage and its ending, all of it settling quietly into the background, into its proper proportion, behind this person who had arrived and was making his presence known with considerable conviction. She held him against her chest. She felt his weight. She breathed. "Hello, Cole," Dr. Hartley said quietly. He was, Clare thought, completely himself. Walter came the next morning. He sat in the chair beside the hospital bed and held his grandson with the practiced ease of a man who has held many infants and found them, every time, sufficient reason for everything else. He didn't say anything for a while. Then he said, "He's magnificent." "He is," Clare agreed. Walter looked at her. "How do you feel?" "Tired," she said. "And very clear." He nodded. "That tracks." Sunlight came through the window, early spring light, the specific quality that makes everything look like a beginning. "Dad," Clare said, "the settlement. Nathan tells me you've reviewed the final terms." "I have," she paused. "I was fair. More than fair," Walter said. "Not generous," she said. "Deliberate. There's a difference. I don't want him to fail completely. I want him to have to rebuild from a place where he understands what he lost." She looked at the window. Complete failure would be too easy. He'd blame everyone else and never understand a single thing. Her father looked at her with the expression she had seen on his face a handful of times over the course of her life, encountering an argument more sophisticated than he'd expected, even from someone he'd always considered sophisticated. "You're probably right," he said. "The Midtown project," she said. "The permit review." "What about it?" "I want it to go forward." Walter raised an eyebrow. "Not as a favor," she said immediately. "If it's a good project, it should move forward. If it isn't, it shouldn't." She paused. "Is it a good project?" Walter considered. "Structurally sound. The design could be stronger. The community impact assessment is thin." "Then tell him that," she said, "through the appropriate channels. Give him the chance to address it. Don't block it. Don't clear it." She tilted her head slightly. Treat it exactly like any other application. You're asking me to treat him fairly. I'm asking you to treat the project fairly, she said. Him I'm asking you to let stand or fall on his own merits. A pause, which will be uncomfortable enough for him. Her father looked at her for a long time. Your great-grandfather, he said finally, would have liked you very much. She smiled. I know. You've told me. The settlement was finalized 3 weeks after Cole arrived home. Derek signed on a Thursday afternoon. Nathan called Claire to confirm. She was sitting in the nursery glider, with Cole asleep on her chest, his mouth slightly open, his small fist curled against her collarbone. It's done, Nathan said. Thank you, she said, for everything. It was an honor, Mrs. Whitmore, he said. Then, after a brief pause, Ms. Hargrove. She smiled. That evening, a text came from Derek, not to Nathan, to her phone directly. I didn't know who you were. She read it. She sat with it for a while. She thought about what the message actually contained. Not an apology, not quite. An acknowledgement that he had been confronted with information that had reframed everything, and that the reframing was deeply uncomfortable. She thought about what she wanted to say back. There were many things she could say. She could explain, carefully and completely, that he had known exactly who she was, that she had been herself, consistently and entirely, for 8 years of marriage, that the failure of perception was his, not hers, that the plain wife he had dismissed had been, in every room they'd shared together, the most substantial person present, and that his inability to see it was not her limitation but his. She could say all of that. She typed one line instead. You knew exactly who I was. You just decided it wasn't enough. She put the phone down. She picked up Cole, who was waking from his nap with the small, indignant sounds he made when the current situation required improvement. She held him against her shoulder and walked to the nursery window, sky blue ceiling above her, the mobile turning slowly, little wooden stars, each one slightly different because she had made them freehand, and she had decided, on a March afternoon with the windows open and music playing, that imperfection was more honest than precision. She stood in the room she had built before she knew exactly who it was for. She thought about the grant proposal she would finish next week, the meeting with the foundation scheduled for the following month, the landscape project she'd been planning for the back garden, the trip she was going to take with Brooke when Cole was old enough, somewhere she had never been, somewhere chosen entirely for herself. She felt, standing in this room, genuinely and quietly happy. Not the performed happiness of a woman reassuring everyone that she was fine, the actual thing. She had been afraid in those first days that she wouldn't find it again. She had been wrong about that. She was wrong about a lot of things, it turned out, including what she was capable of when she stopped protecting someone else at the cost of herself. The baby made a sound against her shoulder. Not distress, just presence, an announcement of himself. Okay, she told him. Okay. She turned from the window. Let's go, she said. 6 months later, Clare Hargrove was sitting in her parents' backyard on a Sunday afternoon. She had taken back her name in early June, quietly, without announcement. She had gone to the appropriate office and filed the appropriate paperwork and come home and made lunch, and that had been that. Brooke had sent flowers. Her mother had called and said, simply, good. Her father had said nothing because he had never stopped thinking of her as a Hargrove. Cole was in Walter's arms across the garden. They were regarding each other with mutual intensity, these two. The 4-generation man with the reading glasses and the flannel shirt, and the 4-month-old with the opinionated eyes and the small, clenched fists. Some kind of private assessment being conducted by both parties simultaneously. Margaret was at the garden table with a book, making small sounds of disagreement at whatever she was reading. Preston and his wife were on the far side of the lawn with their children. Brooke was beside Clare on the bench, working through a paper plate of food and delivering a detailed account of a situation at her workplace that Clare was fairly certain would resolve itself without intervention. The afternoon was warm. Light came through the old oak tree in the corner of the garden, in the particular way it had always come through that tree. Dappled and generous, the kind of light that makes ordinary things look like they were meant to be remembered. Clare held her tea in both hands and listened to Brooke, and looked at her son in her father's arms, and felt something she recognized as the specific, uncomplicated satisfaction of being exactly where you are supposed to be. She thought about the version of herself who had sat in this same backyard 8 years ago, 24 years old and newly married, watching Derek talk to her father about investment returns, while Walter listened with the patient attention of a man who has been listening to people describe their ambitions for a very long time. She had been so happy that afternoon, so certain. She had held her happiness carefully, the way you hold something you believe might be fragile. It had not been fragile. The happiness she'd felt that afternoon had been real, and the things she'd built in the years since, the garden, the nursery, the grant initiative, the friendships she'd maintained, the person she had continued becoming even inside a marriage that was quietly diminishing, all of that had been real too. He didn't take the real things, she thought. He couldn't. He didn't know where they were. Derek existed, still at the edges of her daily life in the specific, limited way the settlement had structured. Occasional co-parenting exchanges, carefully scheduled and clearly defined. He showed up to these with a subdued quality she had noticed from the first one, the expansive ease gone, the performing confidence replaced with something more cautious and interior. He held Cole with unmistakable, genuine love, uncomplicated and unperformed, and this was the only thing about Derek she found she could regard without ambivalence. She did not pity him. She did not hate him. She had arrived with some effort and over some time at a place that was neither forgiveness in the sense of absolution nor bitterness in the sense of ongoing damage. She held what he had done at an honest, workable distance. It had happened. It had been wrong. It had shaped what came next. What came next had turned out to be her life, the actual one. Savannah Cole had been considerably quieter since the settlement, whose financial details had become part of the public record, the private trust, the $430,000. Derek had apparently ended things with Savannah approximately 4 months after the divorce was finalized. Brooke knew the details of this. Clare had chosen not to ask for them. She did not need the details. She had the broad shape of the outcome, and the broad shape was sufficient. The Midtown project had moved forward, eventually. After a revised community impact assessment and a design modification that an anonymous city planning committee suggested. It broke ground last month. Derek was a minority partner now. The financing structure had shifted when 2 institutional investors quietly reassessed their commitments for reasons that were not publicly explained. He was still involved, reduced, working, from what she understood, at a pace and scale that required genuine effort rather than assumption. She had wanted that for him, not his ruin, his education. The distinction mattered. Her grant proposal had been funded in April. The Arts Education Initiative, the one she had drafted and abandoned and returned to on a Tuesday afternoon in the nursery glider while the injunction was being processed. Launched in September, 3 schools in its first semester. a fourth in active discussions. Tuesday morning meetings that she drove herself to and came home from with the specific, sustainable energy of someone doing work that had been waiting for her. She was 33 years old. She had a son who had his grandmother's ears and his great-grandfather's absolute self-possession. She had a name she had chosen to reclaim. She had a garden that was, this year, finally doing exactly what she had always planned for it. She had a house that was hers. Entirely, legally, undeniably hers, with a sky-blue nursery ceiling and hand-painted stars and a glider with brushstrokes she could feel under her thumb on evenings when she sat in it alone. She had Brooke, still talking beside her, and her parents 20 feet away, and her brother's children running across the grass, making the kind of noise that means everything is exactly as it should be. She had Tuesday mornings and grant meetings, and a foundation that was doing real work and a sense of purpose she had been trying to fit into the margins of her life for years and which now occupied its center. She had come through, not arrived, not finished, but through, out the other side of the worst year of her life into something that looked increasingly like the life she had always been capable of building. Brooke said something, and she laughed. A full, real laugh. Unguarded. The kind she had forgotten she had. Cole looked up from Walter's arms at the sound. He looked toward Clare with the serious, evaluating expression he wore when he was determining whether a situation required his attention. He appeared to decide it did not. He returned to his study of his great-grandfather's face. Walter looked across the garden at her, not the careful, watchful look of the early weeks, the contained patience of a man holding himself back from something. Just a look. An ordinary look between a father and his daughter on a Sunday afternoon in a backyard that has held 4 generations of Sunday afternoons. She lifted her tea in a small salute. He smiled. The smile of a man who had built a city in deliberate silence and had raised, in that silence, a daughter who understood everything she needed to. She thought about the notes application on her phone. 3 in the morning in a hospital room, fluorescent light and the small, steady sounds of machines. A promise she had typed to herself about the woman she would become when she came through this. She had written it as a future thing, a destination. She understood now that it had been a description, not of who she would become, of who she already was. She had been her own warden. The door had been unlocked all along. She had simply been standing on the wrong side of it, convincing herself that the life she was protecting was worth more than the life she was postponing. She had opened the door. She had walked through. The light on the other side was, she could say without hesitation or qualification, genuinely good. Brooke was saying something about a colleague who had made a spectacular error in judgment and expected sympathy. He really expected sympathy? Clare said. Complete sympathy, Brooke confirmed. Eye contact and everything. Clare laughed again. The oak tree moved in the light wind. Cole made a sound of satisfaction in her father's arms. Her mother turned a page. It was, in every measurable and immeasurable way, a good afternoon. She settled into it. She held her tea. She let the warmth of the cup move through her hands. She was home. Not the home she had thought she was building for 8 years. The real one. The one she had been carrying with her all along, in the precise way her father carried his, quietly, without announcement, knowing without needing to explain it to anyone that the most substantial things are almost never the loudest. She had always been a Hargrove. She just hadn't needed the whole city to know it. She knew it now. That was enough. That was, in fact, everything. Editorial disclaimer. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to bring you stories of meaning, resilience, and truth. Every word was crafted with intention. For you.